wanted to welcome today's guest speakers, Dorothy Ng, Jane Lawton, and Jonathan Kraft, for a chain reaction panel that will help us answer the question, how can governments successfully reach people with the multidisciplinary skills needed to drive digital transformation? Before we get started, I wanted to briefly introduce our panel of experts in academia, nonprofit, and government to provide insights on what draws digital talent to public service and share best practices for government recruitment and retention. Please join me in welcoming Dorothy Ng, Executive Director of Code for Canada, Jane Lawton, Head of Talent with the Ontario Digital Service, and Jonathan Kraft, Associate Professor with the University of Toronto and Founding Director of Policy Ready. To kick off this panel, I'll now turn it over to Dorothy. Thank you for all being here.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Dorothy. Dorothy Ng. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming to you from the traditional shared territory of many nations, including the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I am the Executive Director of Code for Canada. And I will pass it over to Jane to introduce herself.
Thanks, Dorothy, and hello, everybody. My name is Jane Lawton, and I am the Head of Talent for the Ontario Digital Service. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you today from the City of Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's also now the home of many diverse nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. Jonathan Kraft here, Associate Professor at U of T, also Founding Director of Policy Ready. I'm coming to you also from the Greater Toronto Area, and my pronouns are he and him. And I'm thrilled to be here today. And Dorothy, maybe you could get us started with our session today.
For sure. Cool. Okay, so the first question that I will pose to everyone, and I'll pose it and then I'll answer it myself, but then pass it over to you, Jane, to also answer. The first question is, why do you care about building a digital talent pipeline into government? And I'll start with my own kind of personal story about why I care personally, and also the work that we're doing at Code for Canada. So I used to work in the tech sector. I've also always loved to give back to my community throughout my career and my life. And I found that it was hard to find opportunities to use like my technical skills and knowledge for good. So I think it was about 10 years ago-ish that I had heard about Code for America, which is a nonprofit in the US, and heard that there was kind of this growing movement of like these like-minded, like socially driven tech professionals like myself that were looking for areas to contribute their technical skills to, and this movement was called the Civic Tech Movement. So I had gotten involved with some other folks in my own community to launch our own local Civic Tech group, which I'm based in Toronto, so we launched Civic Tech Toronto, and there I met a whole bunch of other like-minded folks who were just like really passionate about finding opportunities to like contribute their technical and design skills on actual like projects that would impact people's lives. So fast forward, here I am now as the ED of Code for Canada. And basically our mandate is just that, is to like create these opportunities for tech and design professionals to help tackle large scale social problems. And, at Code for Canada, we have this hypothesis that there is a growing population of people, digital talent that we continue to see growing over the years. And as we run these programs as a nonprofit, we're continuing to validate this hypothesis that there is a growing demand of tech talent wanting to work on meaningful projects. And also continuing to discover like kind of the nuances in this space of like, we're seeing folks more interested in this desire or this exploration of wanting to work in the public sector as well. So this has begun to pop up on the tech community's radar, and this is where we're really keen to dig in more here as a nonprofit with this mandate. But I will pass it over now to Jane to answer from your perspective in the provincial government. Why do you care about building a digital talent pipeline for government?
Thanks, Dorothy. So not only am I a passionate civil servant, I've worked for the OPS for more than 10 years now, but I'm also one of the citizens of the people of Ontario. So I really believe in the digital government mission and about making things simpler, faster, and better for the people of Ontario. And selfishly, also for myself, it is my preferred way of interacting with the government. And I believe that all of that starts with digital talent. We need the people who are going to enable us to build these solutions to make things easier for those around us. And my role places me in a unique position where I get to influence and help make that change and bring those individuals into government. And I love it. What about you, Jonathan?
Thanks, Jane. So I'm the only non-public servant on this panel today, and I care about, I'm interested in a digital talent pipeline because I think governments fundamentally require skills and talented people. We're going to get the type of government we get based on the type of people we have working in government, and so we need to ensure we're recruiting the best and the brightest and a diverse set of skills. And the other side of this is that government is increasingly compelled to deal with questions of its own digital role in society, but also the impact of government more broadly in a digital era. And so I think there's a whole bunch of skill sets and competencies that governments are unfamiliar with that are new, and governments need to develop mechanisms by way they can bring folks in, renew the public service, and modernize the types of staff and the types of competencies that they're able to bring to bear to solve our pressing public challenges. So I think the overarching theme of this conference, of course, is kind of digital government and modern government. And of course, we need the people who've got the skills to make that a reality. And governments have struggled with this. So I'm really curious from a research standpoint to understand where are the challenges and also what folks are doing to get around those. So I think it's a prerequisite for modern government, why we need to kind of be thinking about this, and also to kind of institutionalize that to ensure that there's an ongoing firm embedded process to make that happen, as opposed to kind of a more ad hoc way of going about it. So Dorothy, back to you for our second question.
That was great. Thank you to both of you for sharing why you personally are passionate about this topic. And so this is a great transition to let's start diving deeper into the actual challenges. So the first challenge that I pose to, we'll start with Jane, is why is recruitment so challenging? Why aren't people just beating down the door to work in government?
Thanks, Dorothy. So I think that this question has two parts. So the first piece is that there's still a lack of awareness that the government is working in this space. People are not, the skill sets that we're looking to attract, or the individuals who hold those skill sets, are not your traditional public servants. They're not the individuals who are looking at ontario.ca and seeing what the next policy job posting is at. So it's really, really important that you're building awareness around the work that we're doing. And with the ODS, the pandemic has provided a very interesting opportunity to showcase just how valuable digital can be in the government and in the government's response to the pandemic. For example, the COVID Alert app, which our team put together, but also the app we just built in terms of verifying your vaccine status. It's pretty impressive. The team built it in 42 days, and again, it just demonstrates the value of digital services and how they can help support the government and the people of this province and more broadly. So again, it's about building that awareness and showing that these individuals and the talent that you're trying to attract, the value proposition that you get when you're working in government, which is really meaningful work. You have the ability in the province of Ontario to impact the lives of 14 million people. That's really, really significant. And it's not something that many private sector organizations are able to offer you. So making sure that first we are sharing that we are in fact working in this space, and then demonstrating how incredibly meaningful it can be is something that I think will really help in terms of enabling government recruitment in the digital space. I think the other challenge that we really face is that recruitment, and particularly recruitment in government, seems to be built where the user is the manager. Things are done so that things are easier for the manager itself, but they're incredibly hard for the applicant. Now, we're working in an incredibly competitive environment, and so you need to really rethink that process. So I personally try to approach every single recruitment process that we have to make sure that every single individual that touches the process has a favorable experience. Because even those individuals that I'm not going to hire, I need them to go, and when they talk about the process to their friends and tell 5 people, say that it was something that was built for them and was easy for them, because so much of this is around word of mouth. So using every single step in the recruitment process to demonstrate that you value them and you value their time. Now, this can be challenging, but it's also, there's a lot of simple things you could do, like speaking their language, seeking them out in the places where they can be. And one of my personal favorite things to do, and which has sometimes come up with a couple roadblocks within, because it goes against more standard government recruiting practices, but asking people to share portfolios of their work instead of doing a presentation or a test. So really just looking for opportunities to build that process and make recruitment easier for the applicant itself. And I think until we can face that, we're still going to see a lot of challenges in terms of recruiting government talent, particularly in digital. But what about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I could see Dorothy and myself were nodding our heads, and I bet a lot of people watching this right now were nodding their heads at what you were saying, Jane, because bureaucracies are gonna bureaucracy. They're gonna make things cumbersome and difficult and slow, and standardize things in some ways, and that certainly has added a level of difficulty in making the recruitment process as easy and as low friction as it can be, right? But I think from my perspective, I would add to some of the excellent points that you made by saying that we actually don't really know comprehensively, like the data on why people join government or don't join government in a digital kind of specific employment context are really unknown. And I think that that's a problem that exists across a lot of different aspects of digital government, and was one of the main motivators for why I started Policy Ready, and we started the Digital Government Case Study series, was to try and generate some more insights from folks in the field as to what's going on here. And I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence supporting what you're saying in terms of not understanding kind of the governments are in this space, and the issues in just trying to communicate to the networks of folks who could potentially become, our best and brightest digital oriented public servants. I think there's also, a perception amongst folks outside that government is still operating under the context of the kind of jaundiced view of a slow moving a beast that isn't engaged in delivery, that isn't engaged in cutting edge work, and isn't solving real problems for real people right now. And so I think a lot of folks outside of government are trepidatious about coming into the public service because they don't want to be in a slow moving bureaucracy. They don't understand the culture of the bureaucracy. And so there's a lot of kind of unknowns for those who may be curious or want to engage in a public sector work or work in the public interest. So I would just suggest that, governments really need to devote some more energy to this. I know there's been some training needs assessments and other types of introspective HR exercises, but there's really no kind of, talent strategy. There's no study of why folks join, stay on, leave, and what is effective in terms of recruitment. So I think that there's a big need, and this is at all levels in orders of government, I should say, because I think there's a tendency sometimes to think only about Canada's federal public service. We think about provinces, or we think about municipalities, we think about public sector agencies that are doing important public sector work. What is it that makes them attractive? What is it that makes them places that people want to come and work and stay? So I think those are some additional unknowns we still don't really fully grasp. And to be able to develop an effective strategy to kind of meet that challenge, we really need to have a better understanding of it. But I think I would add those things. Dorothy, how about you? I mean, you're in the Code for Canada space. You're seeing a lot of kind of folks involved in technology and public sector work. what are the big barriers for recruitment that you're seeing? What's the challenge here? Why aren't, to use your words, more folks beating down the door to work in government?
Yeah, I mean, I think to actually pull from what you had both said, and actually just tagging on to what you'd said, Jonathan, about not having enough data. I'm going to make like a very quick plug here that we actually have some new fresh data that we recently collected and are ready to share. Just as an aside, like Code for Canada recently announced a partnership with IPAC, which is the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, and Policy Ready, so Jonathan Kraft's group out of Monk School of U of T, to also produce our first case study in this series with them of this digital government case study series. And the entire theme of this first case study is about building digital government talent pipelines and digging into these items of like recruiting digital talent, retaining digital talent in the public sector. For those of you who aren't aware, Code for Canada, we've been running in the past 3 or 4 years, have been running this program called the Fellowship, where we take tech and design talent from the private sector and we embed them in government to deliver digital products that address a complex challenge or problem. But then also these fellows come in and they basically act as coaches that model digital ways of working to the government staff that they work with. And in this case study, what we ended up doing is we actually interviewed like 14 former fellows who all of them had left the private sector, decided to become a fellow to try out working in the public service. And majority of them actually migrated over to government following the fellowship. And so we were able to capture some pretty rich data from in a space that, like, as Jonathan, as you said, like pretty much doesn't have a lot of data to say like, why aren't folks in the tech and design sector applying to work in government, and how come those digital talent pipelines are really thin or weak? And what it seemed like on this recruitment piece in the front end, like what the data seemed to have revealed in some of those interviews, is going back to that thing actually that you said, Jane, of like awareness. Like it seems like the awareness is quite low from the folks from our sample size, which wasn't huge, but every single one of those fellows, which was 14 of them, had said like none of them had ever considered working in the public sector or ever considered that as a viable career path prior to joining the fellowship. A lot of them just never even were aware of job postings in government. And it's because I think a thing that seemed to have come up a lot, was that those job postings and that kind of like word of mouth interaction of like, hey, the provincial government is hiring a UX designer, or that kind of chat was just not happening in the forums that these people go to. So these communities are quite lively. They have their own kind of communities of practice around like product management, UX design, web development. And kind of like if you're not showing up to those venues, then these are the people aren't talking about those kinds of topics or those kinds of job postings. So absolutely, it's like an awareness and knowledge of these opportunities that seem to be lacking as a key finding that came out of that data. So that was it. That was our big reveal, and also exciting case study that we'll be launching today.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Dorothy. Maybe if I can stay with you, because I want to pull on that thread a little bit in terms of, like despite all these challenges in the case study and in your general experience, what are some of the enablers? What are the things that have worked? So sharing kind of some of the practices that Code for Canada has had that have been successful at kind of getting folks in, either from the case study or just more generally in your experience in working with public sector partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's basically a few principles that we lean on when we're doing recruitment, and that has kind of yielded pretty successful and like healthy talent pipelines for recruitment whenever we're recruiting for the fellowship. The first is that it's kind of all about framing. Like we do a lot of framing in our job postings and the promotions and outreach around those job postings, really around that kind of like that opportunity to work on like high impact projects. Like those metrics, Jane, that you shared of like, you have the chance to work on a product that's going to affect like 14 million, people in Canada. those are absolutely like metrics that we lean on and really emphasize in our, our outreach and comms, and draws a lot of like, eyeballs and applications. So framing it in terms of this like ability to work on kind of like really meaty, complex challenges is absolutely the place that we start. Another area is just kind of like showing, as I mentioned before, like showing up where people are, like knowing where to look, knowing that they, tech talent, value communities of practice where they can learn from each other and, share their own experiences of working in certain workplaces or trying certain kinds of employment or kinds of projects. This is exactly where we try to embed, our communications about our job postings. So we go to a lot of meetups, we go to a lot of, communities of practices. And most often what we found in our recruitment data is that the folks who, apply and also make it all the way through to the end, and this came through in our case study interviews as well, is that a lot of it is through word of mouth, as you said it also earlier, Jane. So that's absolutely, we try to like know that word of mouth is a tactic and leverage that heavily. And then finally, like the last kind of pillar that we also put a huge emphasis on is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and embedding these kinds of EDI principles into our recruitment process, into the language of our job postings. We've actually gotten really positive feedback from candidates who have applied, saying like, your job postings are extremely like accessible, inviting, like folks saying like, I never saw myself as a product manager, but reading this, like I could see myself like taking these transferable skills and applying for this role. These are absolutely like the kinds of things that attract people to apply. And so we really take like an EDI focus or DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion focus to our recruitment practices and principles throughout. Jade, I mean, I'm curious, like what you found, what has worked for yourselves at ODS?
Yeah, similarly, or maybe rather validatingly, I would say that we employ and found some great success in many of the same tactics as you guys have been employing. So really seeking out those communities, again, I can't enforce that anymore, because once again, we're not looking for. These are not active government job seekers, so you need to meet them where they are. So we target very specifically a whole bunch of job boards in terms of different communities with skill sets, and do much of the same tactics that Dorothy discussed. We also bring a very big emphasis to diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of our recruitment as well. I mean, we believe really strongly that diverse teams build better products. And not only that, we build for the entire province. We build for everybody. So I don't get to choose my user base. I need to build something that appeals to everybody and that works for everyone, which means that I need those voices at the table at the beginning. So in addition to targeting skill-specific communities, we also seek out different communities in the diversity and inclusion space. Another thing that once again Dot touched on would be thinking about the job ads themselves. I've worked in the public service for more than 10 years, and I still want to fall asleep every single time I read a government job ad. I can't even get through the entire thing usually. So we work really hard to try to make sure that not only are we using inclusive language, but we're using language that is reflective of the industry and language that resonates with people. We've even gone so far as to build our own recruitment page that echoes the Ontario.ca formal job recruitment page, because anybody who is a digital practitioner is going to look at the Ontario.ca recruitment website and immediately be put off, because how could you be touting that you are working so hard to make such strides in terms of being a digital government and then have this antiquated job page? And I do know that there's a lot of great work happening to try to modernize that page itself. However, we did recognize this as a problem and got a little bit ahead of it. So we have created our own job page that showcases it, plain language, reflecting concise wording. We work really hard to move away from the concept that lived experience is so important. So making sure that you're acknowledging that lived experience and that people come from all kinds of backgrounds, and that informs the skill set that they bring today. So eliminating things like the requirement to have a certain designation or a educational requirements. So that is one tactic. Another area that we've been having some really great success in lately has been hosting town halls. And we've been doing this for almost all of our leadership positions. And what has been happening is that it provides a really nice opportunity to, once again, showcase what it is we're working on, but also talk about the work. And the format that we've used recently that has really seemed to generate a lot of traction is usually it's kicked off by Hillary Hartley, who's our Chief Digital and Data Officer, which sends a really great signal about the importance of the role, even if it's, say, a senior manager. And then we would give an overview of what it's like working in the ODS in and of itself. And then we would usually move into a discussion that comes from usually our director of product or some of our directors of policy that speak to some of the actual meaty projects that the role would be involved in. We include a discussion from the manager that the role reports to, and then we also, and probably my favorite part, is have somebody who reports to the role itself speak to it as well and what they're looking for in a leader. It's funny because they're actually not that challenging to arrange, but we've had some really, really great traction with that approach lately. I would think that the other thing is that it's not just about the actual recruitment process itself. It's once you get those individuals in the door, you really need to find a way to keep them. And that comes down to culture. And so making sure that you are trying to build a culture that truly works for the demographic of individuals you're trying to build in or bring into your organization. Think about employee engagement and the employee experience and what that could and should look like. And then I would say that the final thing is just, and probably part of the thing that I like the most about my job is that we iterate, we try new things. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. This town hall in the format that we've been using most recently is probably on its 5th or 6th iteration where we've come to this particular structure for arranging them. And I really love the idea that we can pilot and try new things. And then we very actively seek feedback on the different tactics and approaches we've used, and we iterate. Yeah. So I think that this is actually a bit of a nice segue in terms of the retention piece into our next question. And this one I'm going to address specifically to Dot to get started, but it's something that I particularly grapple with. And I think, once again, it goes to that idea of once you bring these individuals in, how are you going to help encourage them to stay with your organization? So we know that there is sort of, we're still very much on a learning curve, particularly at an executive level in terms of generating buy-in and understanding for agile ways of working. And this is a very significant barrier to some of the digital transformation that we're trying to inform. And it's so incredibly critical to its success. So I was wondering, what are some of the tactics that you have seen successful in terms of increasing executive understanding and ideally not even turning those individuals into understanding digital transformation and digital transformation leaders, but how can we make them champions for this movement?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a meaty, complex question. Absolutely. Like, our exposure and familiarity to this area is again largely around our fellowship projects and the program that is designed to not only deliver a new digital product with government teams as our partners, but also to model behavior change, right? Like gain buy-in at all levels, like working with that team, from the executive level all the way down, and then also get everybody like understanding and seeing these like digital ways of working, and then slowly starting to adopt them, right? And basically understanding so that they can understand the value of these new ways of working. So things like, you know, human-centered design and agile or iterative development, or like user testing. These are all kind of principles that our fellows bring in the door when they're working on these projects. Getting executive leadership buy-in is like, you know, the almost always like the element that kind of like makes or breaks a project, right? Like if the executive sponsor who was working on that with us in the very beginning, you know, shows up at onboarding and is engaged throughout the project and then kind of stays with it to the end, those are the projects that we see have the most success after the fellows are gone. And also we see the most talent retention, right? Like we see the fellows deciding to or realizing that like, hey, like our government partner really does care about this work that we're doing, and I'm not done my work here, and so like I want to continue to, you know, invest my time and energy working here and like and helping this team to grow. So the question now is like, how do we look for executives or encourage them, right, to be involved to that kind of degree and be champions of like digital transformation in projects. It always usually comes down to the individual, so it's a bit harder to, you know, pinpoint. It also comes down to the culture, right? That the kind of like magic word of, you know, it's hard to like put our hands on culture and say like which culture enables digital transformation and which doesn't. Some things that we do set up structurally as part of the program are like elements that as much as possible tries to like enable success of digital projects, and then also that kind of talent retention piece. So one example is that with our fellowship projects, we set up something called a project panel. So this project panel is almost like it's a panel of stakeholders across the government department that we're working with. It includes stakeholders from both, you know, IT, from business, from communications. It always includes, you know, mandatory executive leadership. Someone needs to be there. It includes like legal, HR. We try to make it like basically inviting for anybody to come and almost observe what the fellows are doing. And so what the fellows use these project panel opportunities to do is that they run these panel almost like demos on a monthly basis throughout their project to show everybody like their approaches to problems, to ask for support or help, to like seek guidance on like uncovering blockers or uncovering areas where they can be enabled and move faster or you know pivot in different directions. So it's through this kind of like project panel and demo format that encourages everybody to get involved and like to have almost like a stake, right, in what's being built. But most importantly is to also provide that avenue for executive leadership to show up, like allow them to see like, you know, what the progress and some of the feedback that we received in these project panels, especially from an executive leadership perspective, is that it's executives through these panels almost get access to data that I think often they don't have access to. So the way fellows work is that, you know, often they're working in Agile. And so, you know, with Agile, there's naturally like burn down charts and product roadmaps, you know, kind of frameworks and tools that might not be, you know, common in that government team. But what we found is like pretty positive feedback from the executive level of like, hey, like I've never seen kind of a project timeline laid out in this way as a burn down chart. Is you know, often a piece of feedback that's like, here's a new piece of data that they probably wouldn't have had before. And so usually it's through these engagements and being able to see this new kind of data through the projects. It invites executives to be a part of it, and they get interested, and they end up, you know, staying involved throughout. Yeah, I mean, I guess Jonathan, any thoughts from your perspective on executive leadership? I know you probably have a lot of familiarity with executives.
We could certainly have a whole other conversation around that, but I think the broader question of retention is an interesting one, right? To kind of try and put your head around, and I think executives play an important role also in managing expectations. I think there's a tendency to think like if you just could get some digital people in here, they'll solve all your problems. And the reality, often in the public sector, is that people come in and then they realize that there are established ways of working. There is that cultural piece. There are processes, and they don't know how to navigate those processes, right? And so I think that the role of a good executive in this case is certainly to kind of manage expectations and chart a path forward for how, you know, projects or cultures are going to operate in their specific units. But I think also executives have to play a role in mediating kind of the old ways of working and the traditional public administration, and that this kind of push towards digital ways of working. And you know, frankly, I don't think a lot of executives are well prepared for that because this is a new demand on them, right? So I think that there are opportunities to think about how senior public servants and executives can kind of facilitate unblocking things, enabling things, and explaining why perhaps things work the way they work, or why frustrations and frictions exist the way they exist. The other thing I would say is that I'm increasingly convinced that you know, the retention piece is about talent management, right? And so I know a lot of public servants, and here I'll speak to those federally. You know, people have professional development plans. How much of that is being used as a vehicle to kind of retain staff, to ensure that staff are in a kind of continuous learning process? Are there opportunities to look at kind of across the enterprise of governments, federal, provincial, municipal, the ways in which kind of training and supports are provided to staff that are already in the system to ensure that they're able to kind of grow and learn either through kind of new exercises and opportunities on specific projects or programs, or through training opportunities? I think part of the issue, especially in the digital world, is that, you know, the pace of change is so quick, and the kind of traditional credentialization or way of recognizing skills doesn't necessarily always map well onto the need to kind of recertify or develop new proficiencies in programming languages or project management techniques. So I think the government needs to take a look at kind of A, how it thinks about credentialization, but B, how it's supporting credentialization of staff that are already there, and the personal and professional development of the staff that are in place. You know, I think those are some important questions that governments can think more about. And again, I'd return to this idea that governments are homogenous. I don't think the needs are the same in different departments and different agencies at the federal order or provincial order or municipally, where your need for digital staff and keeping digital staff may be different. I think there's also a need to revisit kind of notions of indeterminacy of positions. Some people want to come in and they want to stay, and they discover the beauty that is a career in the public service. Others want to come in for a short period of time, maybe on a discrete project, and maybe they'll come back again later. And so I think that people are aware of that, but the institutional mechanisms inside government aren't necessarily that well established to kind of nurture those. I think executives can play an important role in kind of speaking to staff and making clear, you know, here are the expectations, here how we're going to work, and to kind of put out fires where they emerge between the obvious tensions that are going to bubble up between, you know, new ways of working and digital ways of working. So I think those are some suggestions I'd offer. I think, you know, one other question I'd like to put to you both, and maybe we'll start with you, Dorothy, is, you know, you referenced the case study, and there are some ideas and some recommendations in there. You know, are there any big bold ideas that you would want to kind of leave us with, or Jane, anything from you that you think you want to kind of emphasize as some ways to meet some of these challenges we've talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just to make it quick, like probably the biggest finding that came out of that research was that was really around the tension that tech talent have with recognizing like their skills and abilities, and having those not really align with current HR practices or like job classifications in the public sector. So, you know, things like you know, job classifications of, you know, if a web developer needs to have, you know, a computer science degree, a lot of our developers don't necessarily have that degree as an undergrad, but like came out of a boot camp, you know, coding school. So yeah, that was definitely, I mean, one of the bold things that maybe is like the easy thing to say, but it's probably going to be the hardest to do is yeah, modernizing HR practices, updating kind of job classifications to align with the skills and knowledge that tech talent, value and have nowadays.